All right, guys, the reason that we're all here today. She's my new friend. Everybody give it up for Alex, guys.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. This is overwhelming. And I am so grateful that you were willing to take time out of your day to remind me that my life matters. Thank you. I am going to express myself. It is the musings of thoughts that I had at about 4 a.m., so it's not well organized, but it's here. Here we go. I needed this opportunity to process my experiences and the chance to see, be seen, and be understood. My message, it's all still for you. And I hope that an ally you know will learn from my patience and make an effort to help you comprehend my pain. This is a request that the church step down from its pulpit to listen to the congregation of the world. It's a world of the oppressed. The church has been the oppressor, and it's okay if they didn't know it. The church is also completely capable of redemption, but only in an actively anti-racist society. It is possible to live in a world with justice and mercy, but until there is justice, there will be no peace. And citizens of the world have been abused. So I encourage us to actively commit to changing that. I would like to breathe freely in a world where no matter where I go, I can enter a church and know that God's house was also my home. I want to feel safe in all churches while existing in my blackness here in America. I invite the church to build initiatives to help the community. I hope they are more aware of how their fear of me was the product of a church-sanctioned tradition of sending the homeless and the mentally ill away, those most in need of their care.
All right.
I also invite local communities to build more resources for this church so that those who may not feel supported within the congregation can grow with someone beyond those walls to ask the difficult, potentially shame-inducing questions and know they will be received with love.
All right.
There will be someone here that they can lean on. I want to build a bridge that links every church with anti-racist initiatives that bonds them more with their community. Now, a week and 1 day ago, this nation celebrated its independence. I had recently moved out of my North Hollywood home and traveled to Oxnard to distantly visit with my family. Given the rising COVID numbers and in concern for all of our health, they kindly put me up in the Residence Inn down the street. And on the evening of the 4th, I was learning about the failed revolution of the Reconstruction era and how the lost cause of the Confederacy was designed to erase and negate the Black experiences by corrupting America's educational system.
Right.
I relearned all of this in a post-Floyd pandemic world from my room as firework bombs burst in the air all across the privileged greenery of my hotel golf course. The next day, I drove back to LA to finalize some last-minute planning in preparation for a camping trip into the wilderness. My chance to socially distance safely among the stars. Just a leaf on the wind of adventure. Since I'd moved out of my home, and since I was excited by the idea of adventure, I found creative spaces to sleep safely. At times, hanging from the rafters in the sway of my hammock, and at other times, napping in my car. A friend of mine described my bohemian choice to rough it in this way as lipstick homelessness. I knew this wasn't the case, since I still had my car and my belongings and friends and family I could call on. I had a roof if I needed it, but in respect of the health of others in this pandemic and a stubborn penchant for the agency over my own life, I chose to remain socially distant. I slept in the hammock last Sunday and Monday night. By day, I would run errands, rearranging my car, and research which national parks I would like to revel in the wilderness. I had a mind to continue in this research when I chose to enter the lawn of St. Paul First Lutheran Church. Now, most of you have seen and read what occurred there. Before I revisit that experience, I must first give you some perspective of who I am and where I'm from. I am a child born of my parents' trauma. Their trauma, my body processes that too. Now, I don't mean this metaphorically, I am quite sincere. I may not have been there for the occurrence of their pain, but science proves that the epigenetic effects causes my body to metabolize their trauma as if it happened to me. The effects of this goes back for generations. Their trauma is my trauma, and I wouldn't be me without them.
All right.
These gifts my ancestors gave me are among many. As you know, within a week, my entire online persona has been scrutinized. My world laid bare at your feet, irrevocably exposed, and still, I know that you do not know me. So please listen further as I give you more perspective. As I said, I am born of my parents' trauma. The trauma they lived, as well as the trauma of my own experience. I lost both my parents twice over the course of my life. The first by unfortunate circumstances, and the second by their death. I lost my mother for the first time due to a neurological disease, multiple sclerosis. All my life, I've been armed with stories of her rebellious avant-garde creativity, her stubborn righteous tenacity, and her willingness to question further into things she did not understand. I never had the opportunity to know that woman. The mother I knew was bedridden, and I watched her stay that way for over 20 years as her muscles atrophied and she repeatedly forgot who I was. I was never to know her in any healthy, fully lucid state of mind for the remainder of her life. When it comes to a sense of mother, I am untethered. She was relatively healthy when I was 4 years old and my parents began their contentious divorce, but she declined very quickly and was relegated to a wheelchair within months. I was placed in the care of my only healthy parent, and with my luck, my father was a determined man, already on his path to change the world. He was my doctor dad, and I clung to him at home, but when we left the house, I knew to stand on my own and witness my father, the Foreign Service diplomat, as he refused to let his blackness diminish the possibilities of his brilliant mind.
Man.
This is how I first lost my father, in sacrifice to his mission to help the world. I also witnessed him suffer imperialist and American white supremacy as he represented this nation abroad. White men that he worked with, remarking on my hair, would laugh, presumably joking with my father, as he said that I looked like a little plantation pickaninny, a child slave. This is a term that he used for a 5-year-old. My father fumed with me privately, explicating all the things that were wrong with that assertion. That was the beginning of my education in what it means to be black in this world. My father lost lawsuits on which he deserved racial justice, and yet he valiantly continued to serve our country as charge d'affaires in impoverished nations, undeniably leaving the world a better place for someone, somewhere.
All right.
He charged forward knowing that in the future there was a place for him. And he deserved the right to be an ambassador. He was supremely qualified.
Yeah.
Yet it was a title that was denied him and forced him into premature retirement. That weighed on him. The financial loss at his late stage in life, with 4 children and a wife that needed him, was a circumstance that weighed on him. Pile on top of that the weathering of his lifetime of trauma, and it all culminated in his death at the age of 64. He passed away a little over a year and a half ago. That was my second chance to lose my father. Both my parents were the epitome of black excellence. Along with their trauma, I was blessed to inherit that too. My black trauma manifests as hypervigilance. Hypervigilant intellectualization of a problem. I fixate on my traumas, desperately fighting for a way to excise those demons. By virtue of my father, I have traveled the world. traveling with the privilege of being an American abroad. In the US, I may be a minority, but abroad, we lived in countries where the majority of the populace was black-skinned bodies like me. Yet still, they were oppressed by an imperialist white supremacist system. Even abroad, I saw white systems of authority languishing and profiting with hands in pockets and knees on necks. I know the struggle toward truth and reconciliation is long, but I've lived in countries where they knew the path to their salvation. And I gotta tell you, at this point, mid-pandemic, and in light of my newfound trauma this week, I will not abide these abuses in America. There needs to be a reformation of the systems of authority in this nation. It begins with an investigation into whiteness. The why and the how of it, the underlying reason behind the choices that are made. Only after an honest investigation into whiteness will we be able to build context into the Black American experience to accurately recall the memory of this nation. We have to study our mutual history in order to reclaim our memories. This nation suffers from trauma so deeply ingrained that all our fears keep us from investigating and discovering our truth. We cannot see who and what we are because we are blocking out the memories of this nation. We flee from the truth. That is a manifestation of this nation's trauma. A lost and disjointed autobiographical narrative is a concept that I am very familiar with as a result of my own adverse childhood experiences. I share all of this because no one on Tuesday could possibly have known any of this about me when I was instructed to leave the lawn of St. Paul First Lutheran Church. Sometimes our traumas are much too dense to share upon meeting. There needs to be trust first. Now, we could have built that if they had challenged their fear, approached me kindly, and asked me to leave. Instead, they gambled on my life, allowing their fear to bolster their continued comfort. They left me in that grass, abused and alone. They were so afraid of me, they did not even know what they did. Only by the grace of my friends, sent there by the panicked request of my faraway aunt, did I walk away from that place alive. Because in that circumstance, after recognizing racial injustices and dispelling them, as my father taught me, I was planning to righteously and tenaciously remain, like my mother would, content to sit there and wait for death under the knee of authorities that primarily defend white bodies. When all along, we could have just sat together, said hello, and built some trust. Oh no, like, oh no.
Take your time.
I don't know where I am.
Make it up.
You can repeat any of this.
Okay, that night, after the events on Tuesday, I went back to my hammock, alone and dreading the oncoming virality as I watched my trauma released into the world. I slept for 2 hours that night. On Wednesday morning, I drove to a park and napped in my car before acknowledging the value of returning to the place of my abuse. This time, among friends and allies, for the chance to speak to the leadership of the institution that abused me. I came with love and high hopes, sitting in a room filled with stained glass windows, which honored mostly men, and none of which looked like me. After our discussion, I left there optimistic at the possibility for change. I know love is a verb, and anti-racist changes over time will show the depth of their love for me and other Black bodies. On this occasion, the day after my undignified abuse on a church lawn, was also my introduction to the media and the beginning of my continual repetition of my traumatic story. I see the value at this opportunity to speak, so I claim that sacrifice in the name of justice.
All right.
Now, by Sunday night, I knew better. I couldn't weather another night of virality alone in my hammock. So now that TMZ and Reddit and the evening news and my friends and my family began to call, sharing their love, expressing their concern, it was all too much for me. There were too many interactions and appointments, so I let that draw me away from my grief. It gave me something to fixate on. Luckily, I had friends who could offer me refuge in their guest room. I felt driven, navigating the newest dumpster fire this nation had thrown at me. That night, I maybe slept for 4 hours. By Thursday night, I could tell that my trauma and fatigue was manifesting in my frazzled nerves as my autonomic systems began to shut down. I'd shake and suppress the bodily request to lose control. That night, I slept for 2 hours. Friday morning, my breath was insistently shallow, and I felt a bodily buzz that truly felt like the precursors of losing control. I spent the morning chanting, I'm okay, breathe through this, Alex, it's okay. And then I'd shake some more, paranoid of flipping the epigenetic switch that would gift me with the trauma of my mother's multiple sclerosis. Friday was the onset of exhaustion for me. Still, I had a photo shoot with the LA Times and a decompression session meeting with a friend. Both interactions were located across the street from the church of my abuse that still haunts me. That was the first day all week that I finally cried. I hope to not be defined by this abuse, but I acknowledge that it is a part of me forever. Friday did end with some victories. After the discussion with the leaders of the church on Wednesday, the president of the Wisconsin Synod released a written statement acknowledging my experience, albeit erasing the severity of my pain, and acknowledging the existence of racism within the church. To which he said, "It is the position of WELS that racism in any form is not acceptable in the eyes of God or in the ministry of our synod.
All right.
Neither the actions of the congregation members nor the attitude they displayed is representative of what WELS or St. Paul's Lutheran or St. Paul's First Lutheran Church and School teach or practice. We are very sorry for what happened and apologize for any pain or hurt this incident caused to the woman and to others. WELS will continue to proclaim the saving truth of God's word and to foster a welcoming and loving atmosphere in our congregation and schools." Signed, the WELS president, Mark Schrader. Now, reading this, it reassured me because to admit that racism in any form is unacceptable in the eyes of God or in the ministry of their synod
All right.
is a bold acknowledgement of the virtues of anti-racism.
Right.
The Lutheran Church doesn't want to represent systems of oppression, and their admission to racism suggests an awareness of the systemic ways it is used to oppress and dehumanize non-white bodies. I found elation in my exhaustion. I also learned that the principal of the school continued to make valiant efforts to incorporate anti-racist practices into the school and the church. And I was pleased to discover that a book club was being formed within the congregation as a support system, venturing into their anti-racism education. Saturday, I claimed for myself because the exhaustion barely let me emerge from my bed. I finally called my therapist. She's so proud of me. I left the house only once to record some voiceover for a prior gig and to recover these clothes that I'm wearing from my storage unit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a formation.
Everything else I had was made for camping, and I wanted to wear something authentic to me while also showing respect for this church. Today, I woke up shaking as my body momentarily joined my mind, fully uncontrollable in revolt at my experience. And I sobbed allowing my body the temporary pleasure of tear-fueled catharsis. A chance for the trauma in my body to process in the way that it needed to. In the way that my hypervigilance had denied, because part of my trauma Black experience is an ability to compartmentalize. I remained hypervigilant all week because I knew the value of being present for an event such as today. But the trauma scored in my body remains pent up even now, and I must honor this new demon raging within me with loving words, the guidance of a skilled anti-racist therapist, and the patience of time. In reflection, Tuesday's trauma remains silently raging inside of me, and it is demanding that I confront my newest demon. I must respect it with the time to talk it down from burning everything like I want to in my rage. So please hear me when I say that I owe my demon some time and some tea. Do not look away from my experience. I have plans for the future for this nation. I have plans to save the soul of the church. And I will need your help and organization to do it. It's clear that we have a lot of work to do, and there will be days when I walk, and there will be days when I have to walk away. I promise you that I'll be back, and all I can ask is that you return to the fight as you also carve space for your own self-care. Because ultimately, I am going to need the help of a healthy, emotionally intelligent army to help me carry the load. The struggle is a long and painful one, but embrace it because salvation is always worth it. I'm so ready to live in an anti-racist America, and I invite all of Christianity to join the struggle.
All right.
I even dream of an anti-racist world because Christianity reaches just that far. Join the resistance because with me you can rest assured that in your dedicated fight against the tyranny of oppression, you are fighting with a compassion that can reunite the world and finally heal the demons we have fled from for so long. You can join me with the confidence in knowing that of all the things on this earth worth fighting for, a future systemically structured around an education of anti-racism is the future we all can believe in. Those who do not remember the past are doomed to repeat it.
All right.
However, we are a nation that is trapped by our fear to dig further into the trauma of our shared history. We do not or refuse to remember our past because it hurts, and I know it hurts. But we need to stop avoiding it, or we will always cycle back to our systemic trauma that leaves Black bodies dead in America due to the fear of apathetic and our greedy systems of authority. Even here, fear is the mind killer. You can't think dynamically when you're afraid. Parts of the brain shut down to simply focus on survival. That's fight or flight. That is what forces us to run from the truth. So believe me when I say that I understand. This work is hard. I've run from my traumas too, but I've also learned that no matter where you go, those traumas are the demons here on earth that will find you.
All right.
So I've learned to fight. I've learned to confront my fears and question them as I talk about my myriad of traumas. You should learn to healthfully talk about your trauma too. White people, you have a history built on trauma as well. It is your fear and your trauma that makes it so simple to dehumanize another and cavalierly take away their life as you post a sign, make the call, and walk away. Your fear kept you from thinking. Because if you hadn't run from fear, you would have discovered that I am simply a person.
Right.
And your welcome could have actually been sincere.
Right.
All right.
Fear is the mind killer. Don't let it rule you. Process your trauma so you can reclaim your voice. and arm yourself with the ability to authentically and compassionately speak through your rage. It is not a condemnation of your soul for someone to identify parts of you that unconsciously reveals your racism. On the contrary, it's an opportunity to salvage your soul, to self-assess, come to terms, learn how to exist more lovingly within your community.
Yeah.
Do not hide from the word racist. It is literally the word that can show you a path to a better self.
Right. You better go off.
Apply what you learn from your anti-racism education to all systems, institutions, businesses, and governing bodies. Don't be satisfied with performative diversity initiatives. The path toward equality requires you to be thorough. We need Black bodies in positions of power, and we need to restructure systems to purge them of their default white supremacist tendencies. I'm here for the work if you are too. In reflection of my work over the past week, it has been a week in continual repetition of trauma as I vigilantly suppress my emotions in order to speak with the press. It was my will to do so. I believe that you needed to know. The event in the grass triggered a reemergence of cyclical and historical trauma that the Black community as a whole experiences with every new Black body wrongfully murdered due to white authoritarianism and white fear. This week, I watched my family triggered by my experience cycle through their trauma as they remembered their moments of oppression. They all had to talk down their demons who were raging in suffering at the injustices of their existence simply for being born Black in this country. It is a cyclical trauma so deeply ingrained that the negative effects of it are then gifted to the children of each subsequent generation. Along with the chains and the blood and the whips and the water, the successes and the trauma of all of our ancestors exists within us. It's within our DNA. It is our responsibility to excise those demons. Those who let their fear rule them are lost as they flee from the joy of that privilege. So when I tell you I was planning to go camping, I wanted to venture into the wilderness for a chance to commune with my demons, to ground my feet with the earth and welcome them to sit with me for tea. Because I know they will follow me wherever I go until I speak with them. In the company of my demons, do I speak of my trauma, and by processing, I journey closer to being whole. There's more. Running from the problem simply exacerbates it. It forces us all to live suffering in avoidance of the knee on the neck of America, and I will not abide. Neither should you. It's abuse, and no one deserves that. On Saturday, I finally spoke to my therapist. I was drained, devoid of feeling, and revealed that I was the woman in the church grass. She admitted that she did not know that it was me. This was a week when my Black-bodied therapist chose to shield herself from social media as a part of her own self-care. But the moment that I mentioned it, she knew exactly the abuse that I was referencing. My trauma is her trauma. It's the trauma of this nation. The compounding trauma of my childhood experiences caused me to lose the luxury of humor. I lost the appreciation for music. I stopped painting. I lost trust. I couldn't laugh or create and never dreamed I'd simply stop at night, then emerge the next day, drawing a blank from all of my sleeping hours, grasping at the dreams the same way I drew a blank from my memories, grasping at the emotional details of my past. I had no grip on my life story. Not until a pandemic did I have a chance to fully address the loss of my ancestors, my parents, and my last living grandmother. And people tell me, but Alex, you've done so well. You achieved so much. Your career's so cool. And yes, I need you to know that as I did all of that, I was incomplete. And I was a sick version of myself. I was psychologically ill with my trauma. I couldn't create or dream or build new ideas as I battled the trauma in my head. It would leave me talented and able so I could book the work under the direction of others, and I could emote the trauma from within, but I could not create a narrative around my own autobiography because I would always draw a blank. My trauma robbed me of my memories and my creativity. I had no bandwidth for structure or for chronology, no grounded perspective, no heart for art of my own. The trauma was ever processing, churning in my mind, which is why I was oddly grateful for a pandemic, for the mandated chance to slow down, get out of the rat race, throw more money at my therapist, and get into deep, difficult conversations with my demons. I healed so much and reclaimed parts of my soul right in time for this nation to throw a new gauntlet of cultural trauma at me. So as the world watched George Floyd breathe his last breath, I was well acquainted with my trauma and able to voice the abuses that this nation has remained complicit and complacent in. I watched myself as I cycled into my trauma, furious at the injustice of experiencing it at all. I knew that it was abuse. This country abuses women, minorities, immigrants, children, and white people of lower status. It abuses gender-bent identities and people across the spectrum of sexuality. That is how this country currently thrives, on the traumatized souls of the oppressed. And I know with great certainty that we don't have to live this way, but we can take a moment to wait for a truck.
Okay.
More than anything, it is those who benefit from their nation's systemic bounty that needs to do this work. Understand why you have the wealth that you have. Truly analyze the cost of your comfort. I always question the motives of the rich. They are the ones that easily lie to themselves, believing they have something to lose by offering their kindness to others. That's their fear fooling them, when really there is no scarcity in the world. All they've got to do is sit and converse with their demons about the racist presenting ways they conduct themselves in the world. Racism exists on a spectrum, and the needle to shift towards the happy world of anti-racism is in your control. It's really only a conversation, so please don't let fear drive you from it. We can thank the tenacity of my mother and the diplomacy of my father at this chance to grow more aware of our church institutions. Christianity must embrace Reformation as it acknowledges the oppressed people it claims to serve. The church, like every other institution, must incorporate anti-racism education and make it widely accessible to those newly awakened allies who want to know what it truly means to give back to their community and learn to love the people who sit on their lawn. They met a lipstick homeless artist planning a camping adventure, and they leveraged their fear to threaten her life. I can't help but think on the three individuals who feared and thought not on the implications of what they had done to me. I'd love to connect with them in discussion of our trauma. I think it could heal all of us. I understand if they need some time, but know that I am willing. This is an invitation to rebuild trust. But over time, you've got to do the work. Everyone needs to talk about their pain and speak through the trauma and graciously listen to the pain of others. Learn to do this with patience and with love. Learn to converse difficult concepts with compassion. You are not the only one that needs to speak on your trauma, and it will be hard. It's hard to speak through the pain, but in the end, it will be so worth it. All institutions are long overdue for a system-wide reset. And this pandemic is the appropriate time to do just that. As America goes back into quarantine, as it should, every institution, especially the church, needs to reboot itself in favor of the world we're currently living in. The oppressed, patriarchal, white supremacist hegemony that continually rears its selfish head. Every trauma manifested by racial injustice is a demon that needs to be excised from the soul of this nation. You can't process your trauma unless you talk about it. So learn to weather the storm. With time, you'll learn to smile through it, because a nation that remembers where it came from will be so much more rewarding for all of us. Give your trauma a voice. Educate yourself on the glories that anti-racism can gift us, and work together so we can save the soul of America. To distant aunts and friends and strangers, thank you for saving me from my stubbornness. To my family, from the members still living who pick cotton, sharecropping the fields of Georgia, to the babies now proven survivors for being born into a pandemic, to the ancestors whose trauma and love I ferociously carry with pride, to the allies whose conviction and dedication to the moral good continually astounds me, to the allies who I've never met valiantly speaking in my defense of my life, to the allies who know that the key to saving Black lives is truly at the heart of saving the soul of white America. Thank you. I lost my place. I am earth-shatteringly grateful that you are here with me to fight. I look forward to the future that we build together in the new promised land of anti-racism. So go forth and preach that gospel. Today taught me that we can do it. A veritable army of allies heard my call and arrived in droves willing to protect me with their bodies. This is the mentality that we need. This is the activation that Black bodies need in neighborhoods, in communities, in businesses, in churches, and across the country, ultimately across the world. Defend against tyranny with your bodies. Do it even when the Black body is one you do not know. Not only do I need an ally, but I also need a soldier. I need people willing to pay dire prices in the fight against racial injustice. So make some time for your demons and learn to speak through your rage to compassionately convert more allies to this cause. Listen to and honor the pain of their stories. Share your own and get them registered to vote. Because this next election will make or break America. Otherwise, a fascist, patriarchal, white supremacist regime awaits us all. And who's got time for that? So please listen, love, and pay attention to the Black voices who've been here all along. And above all else, invest in the nation's education of our true history as we build a better world built in the love of anti-racism. Go preach in the love of anti-racist America.
Give it up for Alex, everybody.
One more time.
One more time, guys. Come on, one more time. I can see how emotional you are.